Strike on this spot. Danun the Egyptian explained graphically in a parable how he extracted knowledge concealed in pharaonic inscriptions. There was a statue with a pointing finger, upon which was inscribed, "Strike on this spot for treasure." Its origin was unknown, but generations of people had hammered the place marked by the sign. Because it was made of the hardest stone, little impression was made on it, and the meaning remained cryptic. Danun, wrapped in contemplation of the statue, one day exactly at midday observed that the shadow of the pointing finger, unnoticed for centuries, followed a line in the paving beneath the statue. Marking the place, he obtained the necessary instruments and prized up by chisel blows the flagstone, which proved to be the trapdoor in the roof of a subterranean cave which contained strange articles of a workmanship which enabled him to deduce the science of their manufacture, long since lost, and hence to acquire the treasures and those of a more formal kind which accompanied them. Almost the same story is told by Pope Sylvester II, who brought Arabian learning, including mathematics, from Seville in Spain in the 10th century. Reputedly a magician because of his technical attainments, Gerbert, as he was originally called, lodged with a philosopher of the Saracen sect. It was almost certainly here that he learned this Sufi tale. It is said to have been passed on by the Caliph Abu Bakr, who died in 634. Why the clay birds flew away. One day Jesus, the son of Mary, while a child, was fashioning small birds out of clay. Some other youngsters who could not do so ran to the elders and told them, with many complaints. The elders said, "This work cannot be allowed on the Sabbath," for it was a Saturday. Accordingly, they went to the pool where the son of Mary was sitting, and asked him where his birds were. For answer he pointed to the birds which had been fashioned, and they flew away. "Making birds which fly is impossible, therefore it cannot be a breaking of the Sabbath," said one elder. "I would learn this art," said another. "This is no art, it is but deception," said a third. So the Sabbath was not broken, the art could not be taught. As for deception, the elders as well as the children had deceived themselves, because they did not know what the object of the fashioning of the birds was. The reason for doing no work on Saturday had been forgotten. The knowledge of what is a deception and what is not was imperfect to those elders. The beginning of art and the end of action was unknown to them. Thus it was also with the lengthening of the plank of wood. It is further related that one day Jesus, the son of Mary, was in the workshop of Joseph the carpenter. When a plank of wood was found to be too short, Jesus pulled it, and it was found to have become in some way lengthened. When this story was told to the people, some said, "This is a miracle, therefore this child will be a saint." Others said, "We do not believe it. Do it again for us." A third party said, "This cannot be true, therefore exclude it from the books." The three parties, with their different feelings, yet got the same answer, because none knew the purpose and the real significance lying within the statement, "He stretched a plank." Sufi authors make frequent reference to Jesus as a master of the way. There is, in addition, an enormous body of oral tradition about him current in the Middle East, which awaits a collector. This tale is found in slightly different forms in more than one Dervish collection. Sufis say that son of a carpenter and other vocational names given to gospel characters are initiatory terms, not necessarily describing the individual's work. The Nat Namus and the Elephant. Once upon a time there was a gnat. His name was Namus, and he was known, because of his sensitivity, as Perceptive Namus. Namus decided, after reflection upon his state, and for good and sufficient reasons, to move house. The place which he chose as eminently suitable was the ear of a certain elephant. All that remained to do was to make the move, and quite soon Namus had installed himself in the large and highly attractive quarters. Time passed. The gnat reared several families of gnatlets, and he sent them out into the world. As the years rolled past, he knew the usual moments of tension and relaxation, the feelings of joy and sorrow, of questing and achievement which are the lot of the gnat wherever he may be found. The elephant's ear was his home, and, as is always the case, he felt, and the feeling persisted until it became quite permanent, that there was a close connection between his life, his history, his very being, and this place. The ear was so warm, so welcoming, so vast, the scene of so many experiences. Naturally, Namus had not moved into the house without due ceremony, and a regard for the proper observances of the situation. On the very first day, just before moving in, he had cried, at the top of his tiny voice, his decision. "O elephant," he had shouted, "know that none other than I, Namus the gnat, known as Perceptive Namus, propose to make this place my abode. As it is your ear, I am giving you the customary notice of my intention." The elephant had raised no objection. But Namus did not know that the elephant had not heard him at all. Neither, for that matter, had his host felt the entry, or even the presence and absence of the gnat and his various families. Not to labour the point unduly, he had no idea that gnats were there at all. And when the time came when Namus the Perceptive decided, for what were to him compelling and important reasons, that he would move house again, he reflected that he must do so in accordance with established and hallowed custom. He prepared himself for the formal declaration of his abandonment of the elephant's ear. Thus it was that, the decision finally and irrevocably taken, and his words sufficiently rehearsed, Namus shouted once more down the elephant's ear. He shouted once, and no answer came. He shouted again, and the elephant was still silent. The third time, gathering the whole strength of his voice in his determination to register his urgent yet eloquent words, he cried, "O elephant! Know that I, the gnat Perceptive Namus, propose to leave my hearth and home, to quit my residence in this ear of yours where I have dwelt for so very long. And this is for a sufficient and significant reason which I am prepared to explain to you." Now finally the words of the gnat came to the hearing of the elephant, and the gnat cry penetrated. As the elephant pondered the words, Namus shouted, "What have you to say in answer to my news? What are your feelings about my departure?" The elephant raised his great head and trumpeted a little, and this trumpeting contained the sense, "Go in peace, for in truth your going is as of much interest and significance to me as was your coming." The tale of Perceptive Namus might be taken at first glance as a sardonic illustration of a supposed uselessness of life. Such an interpretation, the Sufi would say, could only be due to the insensitivity of the reader. What is intended to be stressed here is the general lack of human judgment about the relative importance of things in life. Man thinks that important things are unimportant, and that trivial ones are vital. This story is attributed to Sheikh Hamza Malamati Maktul. He organized the Malamatis and was executed in 1575, alleged to be a Christian. The Idiot, the Wise Man, and the Jug. An idiot may be the name given to the ordinary man who consistently misinterprets what happens to him, what he does, or what is brought about by others. He does this so completely plausibly that, for himself and his peers, large areas of life and thought seem logical and true. An idiot of this kind was sent one day with a pitcher to a wise man to collect some wine. On the way, the idiot, through his own heedlessness, smashed the jar against a rock. When he arrived at the house of the wise man, he presented him with the handle of the pitcher and said, "So-and-so sent you this pitcher, but a horrid stone stole it from me." Amused and wishing to test his coherence, the wise man asked, "Since the pitcher is stolen, why do you offer me the handle?" "I am not such a fool as people say," the idiot told him, "and therefore I have brought the handle to prove my story." A recurrent theme among the Dervish teachers is that humanity generally cannot distinguish a hidden trend in events which alone would enable it to make full use of life. Those who can see this thread are termed the wise, while the ordinary man is said to be asleep or called the idiot. This story, quoted in English by Colonel Wilberforce Clark, Divani Hafiz, is a typical one. The contention is constructive, that by absorbing this doctrine through such caricatures, certain human beings can actually sensitize themselves for the perception of the hidden trend. The present extract is from a Dervish collection attributed to Piridos Sara, the wearer of the patchwork robe, who died in 1790 and is buried at Mazar-i-Sharif in Turkestan. The Wayward Princess. A certain king believed that what he had been taught, and what he believed, was right. In many ways he was a just man, but he was one whose ideas were limited. One day he said to his 3 daughters, "All that I have is yours or will be yours. Through me you obtained your life. It is my will which determines your future, and hence determines your fate." Dutifully, and quite persuaded of the truth of this, 2 of the girls agreed. The 3rd daughter, however, said, "Although my position demands that I be obedient to the laws, I cannot believe that my fate must always be determined by your opinions." "We shall see about that," said the king. He ordered her to be imprisoned in a small cell, where she languished for years. Meanwhile, the king and his obedient daughters spent freely of the wealth which would otherwise have been expended upon her. The king said to himself, "This girl lies in prison not by her own will, but by mine. This proves sufficiently for any logical mind that it is my will, not hers, which is determining her fate." The people of the country, hearing of their princess's situations, said to one another, "She must have done or said something very wrong for a monarch, with whom we find no fault, to treat his own flesh and blood so." For they had not arrived at the point where they felt the need to dispute the king's assumption of rightness in everything. From time to time the king visited the girl. Although she was pale and weakened from her imprisonment, she refused to change her attitude. Finally, the king's patience came to an end. "Your continued defiance," he said to her, "will only annoy me further and seem to weaken my rights if you stay within my realms. I could kill you, but I am merciful. I therefore banish you into the wilderness adjoining my territory. This is a wilderness inhabited only by wild beasts and such eccentric outcasts who cannot survive in our rational society. There you will soon discover whether you can have an existence apart from that of your family, and if you can, whether you prefer it to ours." His decree was at once obeyed, and she was conveyed to the borders of the kingdom. The princess found herself set loose in a wild land which bore little resemblance to the sheltered surroundings of her upbringing. But she soon learned that a cave would serve for a house, that nuts and fruit came from trees as well as from golden plates, and that warmth came from the sun. This wilderness had a climate and a way of existing of its own. After some time, she had so ordered her life that she had water from springs, vegetables from the earth, fire from a smouldering tree. Here, she said to herself, is a life whose elements belong together, form a completeness, yet neither individually nor collectively do they obey the commands of my father the king. One day, a lost traveller, as it happened a man of great riches and ingenuity, came upon the exiled princess, fell in love with her, and took her back to his own country, where they were married. After a space of time, the two decided to return to the wilderness, where they built a huge and prosperous city where their wisdom, resources, and faith were expressed to their fullest possible extent. The eccentrics and other outcasts, many of them thought to be madmen, harmonized completely and usefully with this many-sided life. The city and its surrounding countryside became renowned throughout the entire world. It was not long before its power and beauty far outshone that of the realm of the princess's father. By the unanimous choice of the inhabitants, the princess and her husband were elected to the joint monarchy of this new and ideal kingdom. At length, the king decided to visit the strange and mysterious place which had sprung up in a wilderness, and which was, he heard, peopled at least in part by those whom he and his like despised. As, with bowed head, he slowly approached the foot of the throne upon which the young couple sat, and raised his eyes to meet those whose repute of justice, prosperity, and understanding far exceeded his own, he was able to catch the murmured words of his daughter. "You see, father, every man and woman has his own fate and his own choice." Sultan Saladin, according to a Sufi manuscript, met the great teacher Ahmed el-Rifai, founder of the Rifai order, the Howling Dervishes, and asked him several questions. This story was related by the Rifai in answer to the enquiry, "What reason, if any, have you for supposing that the imposition of the rule of law is insufficient for maintaining happiness and justice?" The meeting took place in 1174, but the story, which is known in other traditions than the Sufi one, has been used to illustrate the possibility of a different state of consciousness in man.